I was last here on Lambuth Day in 2013, as he told you, as an honored guest of the Japanese alumni of Kwansei Gakuin University, and appreciate being asked to speak to you this year. I'm accompanied this week by my wonderful wife of 46 years, Nancy. Hello, Pearl River Church friends, and welcome to what I consider to be the Lambuth Holy Land. To begin, I will review some of my family's Lambuth history in the Methodist Episcopal Church South. No less a pioneer than Bishop Francis Asbury turned loose upon the new American wilderness beyond the eastern ranges, the first mission worker of the Lambuth missionaries, William Lambuth, who was my fourth great-grandfather. William Lambuth was born in Hanover, Virginia in 1765 and admitted on trial into the present Western North Carolina Annual Conference in 1796 and served Salisbury, Greenville, and other places. In 1800, Bishop Asbury sent William Lambuth to preach to the Native Americans in the wilds of Tennessee and Kentucky. He married Miss Elizabeth Greenhaw in Sumner County, Tennessee in September 1800, and my third great-grandfather, John Russell Lambuth, was born in August the following year. At the age of 16, John Russell was preaching, and at 20, he joined the Kentucky Conference. Before long, he volunteered for the Next Frontier to preach to the Creoles and other Indians in Louisiana, and was sent to the Mississippi Conference in 1821. He served in Louisiana and Alabama, both at the time part of the Mississippi Conference. In 1827, he married Miss Nancy Kirkpatrick in Clark County, Alabama, eventually moving to Mississippi in 1843, where he settled with his family in Madison County, not far from the Natchez Trace, near what is now known as Pearl River Church. Called Pearl River Academy, the church included a school as well. W.W. Pinson, Walter Russell Lambuth's biographer, delights in the story of the birth of Walter's father. Quote, in 1830, he, John Russell Lambuth, Walter's grandfather, was holding a camp meeting in Greene County, Alabama. Suddenly, without warning, he left the meeting. When he returned, he made this unique announcement. I was called home by the birth of a baby boy. In heartfelt gratitude to God, I dedicate the child to the Lord as a foreign missionary, and I add a bale of cotton to send him with. Dedicated and endowed at birth for missionary service then was James William Lambuth, my second great-grandfather. James William was raised right here in this Pearl River Church. He graduated in the first class at the University of Mississippi in 1851 and became a Methodist preacher and served 1 year as pastor of the Vernon Circuit, now Flora. Reared in Madison County, Mississippi, James William began his ministry by preaching to Negro slaves in their log cabins. When the call came for missionaries to China, he answered simply, I will go. Bishop Marvin A. Franklin, who presided over the Mississippi conferences of the Methodist Episcopal Church South, liked to tell the story of the gifted Yankee girl who became Mrs. James William Lambuth, Mary Isabella McClellan, relative of the famous Federal General George B. McClellan, and my second great-grandmother. How she came to Mississippi from New York State to be a governess. At a missionary anniversary of the Mississippi Conference, she put a card in the collection basket on which she had written, I give $5 and myself. While teaching in Mississippi, she met her future husband, James William, then a law student whose home was a large plantation of Mississippi. They were married on October 10, 1853 by the late President Thornton, president of a college in Virginia, and then president of a college in Mississippi. A little side note, sometimes you see Bishop Lambuth's name as Bishop Walter Russell Thornton. I can find no evidence that he was ever named Thornton, but I think it comes from the fact that President Thornton married his parents. Sorry, a side note. So the same year, 1853, James William was licensed to exhort, and in the fall joined the Mississippi Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church South. Was received into full connection, elected to orders, and appointed to Nanjing, China. He and Mary Isabella left New York City in the sailing vessel Ariel on May the 16th, 1854, doubled Cape Good Hope, and reached Shanghai, China on September the 17th, 1854, a journey of 135 days. Just think about that. Now, like many of you, I am what some call a cradle Methodist, born into Methodism. But Walter Russell Lambuth, my great-granduncle, was a birthright Methodist missionary. If there is anything in the old wives' tales or depth psychology to establish any credence in prenatal influences on the destiny of a child, Walter Russell had to be either a missionary or a buccaneer. He missed by 2 months only being born between America and China, 16,000 miles by sail through the Cape, around the continent of Africa, out by the Philippines, and in through the China Sea. He was born for missionary journeys to John William Lambuth and Mary Isabella McClellan Lambuth in the city of Shanghai, Jiangsu Province, China, on November the 10th, 1854, at 9 a.m. in the morning. Walter Russell learned the Chinese and English as his first languages. At 4 years of age, he journeyed as a very juvenile assistant to his father to Suzhou, now called Suzhou, China. Because of his health, Walter was sent at 5 years of age to his grandfather McClellan in upstate New York, and later joined his parents, who were home briefly in Mississippi. While the Battle of Vicksburg was raging, the family started back to China through the lines of both armies. At the beginning, in a horse-drawn buggy, but on the last long stretches in an ox cart, because it was less likely to be appropriated by Confederate or Union soldiers. The remainder of the journey to China was again a 5-month stretch at sea. After another period in America, for the sake of his never robust health, Walter began the schooling he needed for his own missionary career. There is a natural inclination to speak of training for the career. Schooling he needed, training, all his life had been training for his own missionary career. In 1869, he was in school at Lebanon, Tennessee. In 1871, he entered Emory and Henry College near Abingdon, Virginia. Quote, where so many strong men of the church have been trained, unquote. I'm not sure who said that. Though he was out of college for long periods due to eye trouble, he studied when he could at the University of Nashville and graduated from Emory and Henry in 1875 at 21 years of age with honors. All that time, his plans were clear. He would be a missionary. Duty, he wrote, leads me to China just as much as it leads me to preach. But always the need in the field for medical service had moved him. At college, he added pre-medical subjects to his other courses, and at Vanderbilt University, while pursuing his theological studies, he studied medicine also, earning both theological and medical degrees. While pursuing his degrees, Walter also served some time as pastor at Woodbine and sometime as junior preacher at McKendree Methodist churches, joining the Tennessee Conference as an ordained elder in 1876. In 1877, he began his own missionary journeys in earnest. On August the 2nd, 1877, he was married to the lovely and gifted Daisy Kelly. She was the daughter of the McKendree pastor, Dr. D.C. Kelly, who had himself been a medical missionary to China, and later served as secretary of the Board of Missions. By November of the same year, Daisy and Walter Lambuth were in Shanghai, and by December at Nanjing, beginning their medical work on the excessive annual work budget of $300. Walter continued to study medicine and helped to translate the New Testament into Chinese. In 1880, he opened, against opposition, an opium refuge in Shanghai and set out with some success to rid China of the curse imposed upon it in the Opium War by the greed of ruthless empire. My great-grandmother Walter's sister, Nora Kate Lambuth, was born in 1863 in Madison County when the family returned home for a visit. Like Walter, she grew up in China and returned to the United States for university education. My great-grandfather, William Hector Park, born in 1858 in Catoosa County, Georgia, knew from the age of 9 that he wanted to be a missionary. I'm not sure how you do that, but he did. In the summer of 1879, the thought came to him that he ought to study medicine before going out to China. Serendipitously, the Board of Missions was getting ready to open medical work in Suzhou, China. Dr. Lambuth had written asking the board to find a young doctor to go with him to that city. It was decided that William Hector Park study medicine under the direction and at the expense of the Board of Missions. William Hector's first year in medicine was in the medical department of the Vanderbilt University. In Nashville, he met Miss Nora Kate Lambuth, Walter Russell Lambuth's sister, younger sister, and at a dinner given to her father and mother on the Vanderbilt campus by Bishop McClellan. Miss Nora had just finished her education at Ward's Seminary, and her father and mother had come over to take her back home to China. In 1881, a new set of circumstances had arisen. Dr. W.R. Lambuth, Walter Russell, asked permission of the Board of Missions to study medicine a year in New York before returning to China. He's got to remember, he was somewhat of a country doctor in China. He had no specialists to refer people to. He had to do all the medical work himself. When his request was granted, he went on to New York with his wife and child, and then wrote to the board to send William Hector Park to New York to study there with him instead of staying on alone in Vanderbilt. Thus, my great-grandfather Park entered Bellevue Hospital Medical College with Dr. Lambuth, and they sat together during lectures. According to William Hector, Dr. Lambuth was the best hand at taking notes I ever saw. I trimmed the pencils, and he took the notes, and we both studied those notes. For you see, even at that date, the teaching was still in the old style. Lectures by the professors who were supposed to tell you all you ought to know, and quizzes and examinations on those lectures. And this is my grandfather Park talking. I never saw a microscope, but I was told that one of the professors had one in his office at home. The course was a strenuous one. Sometimes we would be so pushed for time to study, we would read from Dr. Lambuth's notes under the lampposts on our way to school at night, reading aloud under a lamppost, and then repeating what had been read as we ran from that lamppost to the next one, and so on. On his return to China, Dr. Lambuth immediately set out with Dr. William Hector Park, who's now fully authorized to go out, for Suzhou, to which at the age of 4, Walter Russell had made his first missionary journey. There together, they opened the medical facility which became the famous Suzhou General Hospital. This hospital also had a medical school in which Dr. Park taught medical students and practiced medicine, serving 41 years in Suzhou as the first president and supervising doctor of Suzhou Hospital. And it was my privilege in 2007, along with my uncle Don Messersmith and his wife, and my brother and some cousins, to visit that hospital. and it was wonderful. Side note, 4 years elapsed from the time William Hector Park and Nora Kate Lambuth met at Bishop McTyrie's home on the Vanderbilt campus in Nashville, Tennessee, until they were married in the little church in Kobe, Japan, October the 6th, 1886. During those years, Miss Nora Kate Lambuth traveled around the world going east and half around the world going west, and William Hector traveled around the world going west and half around the world going east. In their combined travels, they trod the soil of Ireland, Scotland, England, France, Switzerland, Italy, Gibraltar, Egypt, Aden, Colombo, Penang, Singapore, Hong Kong, China, and Japan, and parts of 25 states, more or less, and one of the provinces of Canada. And they lived on or touched 4 of the great continents of the earth, namely North America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. In summary, they met in Nashville, Tennessee. They fell in love in Nagasaki, Japan. He declared his love in Suzhou, China. He asked for her in Shanghai, China. She set the date in Reed City, Michigan. They were married in Kobe, Japan. Their wedding reception was held in Shanghai. Their Chinese wedding feast was given in Suzhou, where they lived happily ever afterwards. In Suzhou, Dr. and Mrs. Park inherited the home built by Dr. Walter Russell Lambuth, who gave some of his furniture to Dr. Park. So in the end, Dr. Park got Dr. Lambuth's home, his furniture, his hospital, his medical school, and his sister, while Dr. Lambuth left on his wonderful career in helping to carry the love and light of the gospel to the uttermost parts of the earth. There is not time to recount here the research, the pioneering medical practices, the problems of family health, or the sharp debates on mission policy in which Walter Russell Lambuth, with filial devotion, supported his father. As the result of combinations of these eventualities, he spent a while in Peking, Beijing now, in the north of China, working in some pioneering ventures with the missionaries of the Methodist Episcopal Church South. The latter proudly continued to number Walter Russell among its most effective missionaries. In 1885, under special authorization from the Board of Missions and a munificent appropriation of $3,000, the Lambuths, James William and Walter Russell, were directed to Japan to open a mission there. The younger Lambuth, at 32 years of age, was made superintendent of the Japan mission by the appointment of Bishop Holland N. McTyrie. Characteristically, he threw himself into pioneering effort. Within 4 years, he had founded 2 famous schools. The Hiroshima Girls' School, 1887, with his mothers today, and 35 of their alumni, I believe, came here 5 years ago for Lambuth Day. In Japan, Walter Russell propounded a doctrine of strategy for his church, quote, occupy Kobe strongly as a center and supply station. He was forever opening new territory in some new part of the world. But this was not to spread the line thin, as others were inclined to do. It was a strategy of penetration and concentration at a site carefully selected where an effective center would be developed, inclusive and as nearly as possible self-sustaining. Here, national leadership would be evangelized, recruited, and intensively trained. The extension would be primarily in their hands, and I think that was the key to his success, was getting the indigenous peoples to run these things. Walter Russell Lambuth returned to America in charge of all missionary work as General Secretary of the Board of Missions from 1892 to 1910. And he was elected bishop by the Methodist Episcopal Church South in 1910. His jurisdiction as bishop included the west coast of the United States, Brazil, and Africa. Think about it. After China, Bishop Lambuth had a strong desire to do mission work in Africa. Accordingly, in 1911, he set off for the Congo, accompanied by Dr. John Wesley Gilbert, an incredibly gifted African-American professor at Payne College in Georgia. Dr. Gilbert was fluent in French, the language of the Belgian colonizers of the Congo. Like Bishop Taylor before him, Bishop Lambuth favored indigenous church leadership. In both China and Japan, identifying and educating potential leaders to take over the supervision of their own churches and institutions was a Methodist Episcopal Church South priority and served to root the churches firmly in new territories. Bishop Lambuth and Dr. Gilbert followed much the same route into the Congo that Taylor did, going east along the Kasai River, which was much easier to navigate than the Congo River. They traveled beyond Lulaberg, however, to Wembo Nyama. Lambuth's mission strategy varied quite a bit from Taylor's, as he believed in putting time, energy, and personnel into a few mission stations, rather than positioning one missionary family at each station along the way. With Dr. John Wesley Gilbert, who was a linguist of the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church, his partner on this journey. Bishop Lambuth in 1911, the two of them traveled 4,100 miles through the Belgian Congo and opened Methodist missions in Central Africa. Thus he began his career as a bishop in the consummation of a lifelong purpose by establishing a mission in the African Congo among the Batatelli. There was also the Wembo Nyama General Reference Hospital. This hospital was the first healthcare structure of the Central Congo Episcopal region, initiated by Walter Russell Lambuth and Dr. John Wesley Gilbert, who was a scholar and teacher from Payne College and a leader of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. More than a century ago, the hospital started with a dispensary to treat patients with leprosy, tuberculosis, and sexually transmitted diseases. That small beginning evolved into the current reference hospital that supports the entire population of the Wembo Nyama Health Zone, more than 110,500 people. Bishop Lambuth went on to open mission stations in South America, Manchuria, Siberia, Korea, Cuba, and Europe. Having grown up in China, Walter Russell Lambuth was keenly aware of the knowledge, skills, and contributions of the people he served in mission. One of the reasons for his great success was that he counted the emerging indigenous leaders of the new churches as his equals, and he rarely traveled into new territory without local leaders by his side. So many learn their geography by the scenes of wars. Bishop Lambuth learned his by missionary conquest. As missionary to China, 1877 to 1885, he had joined in founding Suzhou Hospital. As superintendent, 1885 to 1891, he opened the mission in Japan. As a mission board secretary, 1892 to 1910, he had significant part in the opening of work in Korea, and with Bishop Warren A. Candler, shared in the opening of work in the island of Cuba. Bishop Lambuth also headed the War Work Commission during World War I, which resulted in the formation of Southern Methodism in Belgium, Poland, and Czechoslovakia, with funds derived from the missionary centenary in 1918 and 1919. As a bishop from 1910 to 1921, he ended his career in what he described as, quote, pushing toward the pole. And this is a quote from him. I realize that I am making my last trip in the Orient, but I have had a part in the founding of our missions in Japan and Africa, and now I will feel satisfied if I can lay the foundation of this work in Siberia and Manchuria. The doctors told me not to come, stating that I must go under the knife and then stay in the hospital for 60 days. But I want to found this mission first, then will I be satisfied. Bishop Walter Russell Lambuth died on September the 26th, 1921, in Yokohama, Kanagawa, Japan, at the age of 66. And his ashes were buried in Shanghai, China, next to his mother. Some have called Bishop Lambuth the greatest missionary since the Apostle Paul. I don't know if he was, but here are some of his written insights about mission work. This is from a book called The Medical Missions, The Twofold Task by Walter Russell Lambuth. The work of medical missions is also a challenge to love. Love, let us repeat, is the great missionary motive. To float the great cause of missions, the motive must be big enough not only to prompt our ministry to the individual, to compass a nation with our high purpose, but to include a world in its terms of sacrificial and Christly love. It must be centripetal as well as centrifugal. In the effort to get in touch with the lowliest and the neediest man, it must find its spring and inspiration in the touch of the risen Christ. Bishop Lambuth never fully realized the true significance of missionary motive until he reached the mission field. There came one day into his Suzhou hospital a Chinese woman. "Can you do anything for me?" she asked. "I hope so," was the reply. "What is the matter?" Then she told her story. "I am the wife of a small farmer. We are very poor. My life of 70 years has been a hard one, for we have eaten much bitterness day after day. I have crawled with my husband through the mud, on hands and knees, in cultivating the rice stalks. We had neither plow nor buffalo. My body is tortured to death with rheumatism and burning up with fever." She was put to bed, given medicine, and made as comfortable as possible for the night. The next morning, after attending the surgical cases, Dr. Lambuth visited the woman's ward, paused by her bedside, took her hand in his, and asked, "Have you eaten your soft-boiled rice? How do you feel this morning?" "Oh, I feel better," she replied. "Then why do you cry?" The tears were trickling down her weather-beaten cheeks. "Oh, doctor, you have been so good to me." And then she added, "I'm an old woman. My life has been bitter to death. I've given birth to children. They grew up, married, and have gone, but not one has ever held my hand or said kind words like a son. Oh, doctor, when I am well, do not send me away. This is heaven. Let me mop the floors and cook the rice. My old husband might sweep the yard and mind the gate, but let me stay. This is the only heaven for an old woman like me." As he stroked her rough hand, the tears came involuntarily to his own eyes. Until her face was lost in the blur, there seemed to be another face into which he gazed for the moment. The face of the great physician who said, "Inasmuch as you have done this unto the least of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me." Then Dr. Lambuth discovered the real motive of the missionary. It is not the need of the individual, deep and appealing as that is. Not the Chinese, great as the appeal of countless multitudes may be. Not the command, imperative as its terms are, but the Master. The Master himself and his love. Herein lies the constraint. In neglecting these weaker ones, we neglect him. In ministering to their need, we minister to him. The true missionary motive is wrapped up in his life and centered in his love. In 1915, Dr. Lambuth was invited, Bishop Lambuth at that time, was invited to give the first Cole lecture at Vanderbilt University called "Winning the World for Christ, a Study in Dynamics." And this is a little bit of what he wrote. Love is immortal, imperishable. It is found in the waste places of the earth, ready to become the basis of a new hope for humanity. We were lost in the heart of Africa. For 2 days, our guide was without his bearings. The first day's march made a complete circle. We halted in the middle of the afternoon to find we were at the starting point. Our 60 caravan men were almost mutinous. They had had nothing to eat. The night was spent in utter bewilderment, our men sleeping upon the bare ground. Long before day, the march was resumed. We held to a dim trail until a late hour, when once more uncertainty came down upon us like a fog. A hunter appeared who told us there was a village ahead, but it belonged to a cannibal tribe of bad reputation. The question was hotly debated as to whether we should spend the night in the forest or go forward. Our hungry men decided to risk cannibals rather than leopards, so we pushed on. Night had fallen when a gleam of light shot along the path. The caravan swung boldly into the center of the village where fires were burning and began a parley for food. Utterly exhausted, this is Dr. Lambuth, or Bishop Lambuth, utterly exhausted, I threw myself upon a log. We had marched from dark starlight until the stars had risen again. At this juncture, a young man, lithe and powerful, pressed his way into the front, bowed low, and begged the Ngangabunga physician to come at once and see his mother. I put him off, saying I was too tired to walk and would come later. He went, but returned insisting that I go to see his mother. Again I refused, but promised to come as soon as a cup of tea had been prepared. Reluctantly, he disappeared in the darkness. The third time he returned. So insistent was his plea that I said to Professor Gilbert, my companion, I cannot stand it. I must go because of his importunity. He led me a few paces to his hut. A fire was smoldering at the door upon the ground. Silhouetted in the flicker of light was the outline of his mother. We crawled in upon hands and knees to the place where she crouched moaning upon a mat of reeds. An examination developed the fact that she had an abscess of the middle ear. Her sufferings must have been horrible, but perforation had taken place. It was not the pain now, but the discharge that terrified them both. In their childlike simplicity, they imagined the brain itself was oozing out. A few kind words reassured them. Some medicine was given, and I returned to my fellow traveler. Gilbert, said I, thanks be to Almighty God. I have found an unquenchable spark of divine love in the breast of a cannibal. There is love enough in that man's heart for his mother, and hope enough in mine upon which to build one's faith in the possibility of a redeemed Africa through the larger divine love of Jesus Christ. In closing, I will quote from Bishop Lambuth's preface to that whole lecture in 1915 at Vanderbilt University. Great emphasis has rightly been placed by missionary leaders upon the needs of the unevangelized millions, the urgency of the task, the unprecedented opportunity of the hour, the commission to the church, and the command to go, which constitutes the divine imperative. As great as is the demand for widening the area of effort abroad, the greater need of the hour is that of deepened conviction at home. We must have a new sense of God, realize the imminence of the kingdom, the place and importance of intercessory prayer, the personality and power of the Holy Spirit, the necessity for heroic service and sacrifice, the mission of the church, and the preeminence of Christ, who is head over all. If we can be brought to a true and vivid realization of these things, and the church can be adequately awakened to a sense of God-given mission, an immense stride will have been made towards the goal set before us in the prayer of Jesus Christ, thy kingdom come. Amen.